Oh, there's something in my chest that I can't hide. When feelings get involved, I'm terrified. 'Cause I've been here before and said goodbye. Oh, are you the one when I try to look, I wish I'd find? Oh, how can I love when I've been hurt 100 times? For you, I'd give it one more try. Turn away and wrestle with my doubts. Oh, I leave them all behind, but don't know how. Bury my head deep within the crowd, but I'm reaching for your hand to pull me out. Oh, are you the one when I try to look, I wish I'd find? Oh, how can I love when I've been hurt 100 times?
Okay, hello everybody. It is time to get into Revan again. We are nearing the end. I'm going to do 3 chapters tonight. That should leave 2 chapters and the epilogue for next time. And then we'll be done with this novel. I don't know about anybody else. It's not been my favorite, but I want to read everything in order as much as possible. So that's just part of it. All right, so let's jump into it. Chapter 25. Scourge led them up the stairs and back to the breach in the wall where the Emperor's guard had first burst in. Though they could hear the distant sounds of battle echoing faintly through the halls, they didn't encounter combatants from either side. Once they were outside, Mitra allowed herself to breathe a sigh of relief. Night had fallen, but several fires burning inside Nyrus's stronghold illuminated the grounds, giving them a clear view of the destruction. The thick stone wall surrounding the courtyard and the building had been reduced to rubble, and judging by the number of bodies strewn about the courtyard, this had been the location of the fiercest fighting. They picked their way through the carnage to where Scourge's speeder stood unharmed near the landing pad. Every vehicle around it had been destroyed by artillery fire. "It's a miracle this thing's still in one piece," Revan remarked. "The guard must have been watching our arrival," Scourge said. "They knew which speeder was mine." Sorry. Excuse me. The 4 of them climbed in, Revan and Mitra helping T3, then headed for the cave where Mitra and Scourge had first met. During the journey, Mitra tried to study Revan without being too obvious. He was still wearing the red and gray mask. For her, this was his true face. She knew what he looked like beneath the helmet, but he had almost never removed it during their campaign against the Mandalorians. Seeing him in the cell without it had struck her as odd. The passage of the years and the suffering he had endured as a prisoner were clearly etched on his features. When he wore the mask, however, all that was hidden. It made him look indomitable, invincible, a legend come to life. Mitra remembered what Bastila had said to her when she had given her the mask. She said she had hidden it from Revan for all those years because she feared what it represented. She feared it would change him. Now Mitra understood what she meant. Without the mask, he looked more human. It was easier to remember he was just a man with all the weaknesses and vulnerabilities that implied. With the mask, however, without the mask, he looked more human. Anyway, with the mask, however, Revan was an icon, a symbol. He was a shaper of history, an individual defined by his actions rather than his thoughts, feelings, and beliefs. Maybe Bastila was right. Maybe Revan needed to become what he once had been to survive this. He had easily bested Darth Nihilus, but the Emperor was a much greater opponent, and yet she couldn't help but feel some small tinge of regret knowing the man Bastila loved might have been swallowed up by the weight of Revan's own past. Scourge brought the speeder into land, and the 3 passengers disembarked. "You're not coming?" Mitra asked when the Sith made no move to join them. "I'm going back to Koth City," he said. "I'll see if I can learn any more details about the attack. If we're lucky, the Emperor has spread his resources too thin, leaving him vulnerable. Now might be the time to strike." "Bring back some supplies," Revan said. "Food, water, soap, so I can wash the filth of that prison off me." Scourge nodded. "I'll be back in a few hours." The 3 of them went into the cave, T3 using his lamp to illuminate the dark interior. The cave was empty now. While waiting for Scourge to return from his meeting with the Emperor, Mitra and T3 had buried the bodies of the fallen security chief and his soldiers in a bare patch of ground a short hike away from the cave's entrance. "I'm sure you're eager to change out of those clothes," Revan said. "What about you?" Mitra thought. "Why haven't you taken off that mask yet?" "We have something to show you first," she said. "T3, play the holovid." The droid rolled up beside them, projecting a 30-centimeter tall image of Bastila cooing over Revan's 3-year-old son. "I don't know if you'll ever see this," Bastila said, adjusting a lock of hair on the boy's head as she spoke to the holorecorder, "but I have to believe you'll return someday, and when you do, I thought you'd want to share your son's birthday." Revan didn't say anything. As if in a daze, he slowly sat down on the floor so the projection was at eye level. "Wave to Daddy," Bastila said, pointing in the direction of the recorder. "Say, we miss you." The boy did as instructed, waving his tiny arm vigorously as he repeated Bastila's words. To Mitra's relief, Revan reached up and removed his mask as the holovid continued to play, setting it down on the ground beside him. "I know we didn't discuss names before you left," Bastila said, "but I called him Vanner." Revan smiled, realizing it was an anagram of his own name. "I want him to know who his father is," the holo continued. "I want him to understand you are a part of him." A tear rolled down Revan's cheek as he watched the vid, and Mitra quietly retreated into a dark corner of the cave to let him watch in private. She'd stashed her clothes here before she and Scourge had left for Nihilus' stronghold, and the shadows gave her the privacy she needed to change out of her slave's outfit. Instead of the black pants and sleeveless red shirt she'd worn on her first arrival, however, she once again donned her Jedi robes. She didn't consciously think about her choice, and it was only as she was clipping the lightsaber to her belt that she realized what she'd done. "You're following Revan's lead," she thought. "If he's wearing Jedi robes, then so are you, just like old times." As the holovid continued to play, she lingered near the back of the cave. She couldn't help but overhear Bastila say, "I love you, Revan," as the recording came to an end. "I love you too," Revan responded. the acoustics of the cave making his voice unnaturally loud. Mitra shifted her feet uncomfortably at the exchange. She wasn't jealous of Bastila. Mitra loved Revan, but not in that way. She'd never had romantic feelings for her mentor. Rather, she regarded him with deep admiration and intense devotion. At this moment, however, she was acutely aware that Bastila and Revan shared a relationship that went far deeper than what Mitra shared with him. She knew she shouldn't begrudge them that, but some small part of her couldn't help but feel her reunion with Revan had been preempted by the Holovid. T3 beaked inquisitively as the video came to an end. Of course, Revan said. I'll watch it 100 times over if I can, but give me a minute. He stood up and went to join Mitra in the back of the cave. Thank you for this, he said, and for saving me. It was nothing. No, Revan said, shaking his head. Do not underestimate all you have accomplished. Nobody else could have found me across an entire galaxy. Nobody else could have saved me from my imprisonment. He studied her for a moment. I was told you had been cut off from the Force, but I can sense its power in you. I always knew you had great potential, but you have become far greater than I could ever have imagined. I'm just following in your footsteps. Not any more, Revan replied. You have blazed your own trail. I can sense you have walked a path even I would not dare to tread. I owe you everything, Mitra. It is a debt I will never be able to repay. No, Mitra said with a wan smile. Without your teaching, I could never have become what I am today. I am the one who owes a debt she can never repay. Then why don't we call it even, Revan said. A wise and just solution, she replied, as always. Would you like to see the Holovid of Bastila and my son? He asked, offering her his hand. It would mean more to watch it with a friend at my side. Of course, she said, a lump forming in her throat. It would be my honor. When Scourge arrived back at the cave, he found Mitra and Revan huddled side by side on the floor, staring at a holovid projected by T3. He caught a glimpse of a young human female and what Scourge assumed was her child, but as he approached, the droid quickly cut the recording off. What was that? He asked. My wife and son, Revan said. He stood up stiffly and stretched, and Scourge wondered how long he had been sitting on the floor of the cave watching the holovid. He also noticed that Revan had removed his mask. It was sitting on the ground beside him, seemingly forgotten. I didn't know you were married, he said. When Revan didn't answer, it was clear he had no intention of discussing his personal life with a Sith. They might be allies, Scourge realized, but they were far from friends, which is as it should be. For a Sith Lord, friends were a liability. What did you find out? Mitra asked, as Revan extended a hand to help her up. It wasn't just Nyrus who was attacked. The Emperor killed them all. The files you showed me listed 5 current members of the Dark Council plotting against him, Mitra said, looking to clarify. Are you saying the Emperor's Guard wiped out all 5 in a space of a single day? I said he killed them all, Scourge replied. All 12 members of the Dark Council, even those who weren't part of the conspiracy. He wanted to send a message no one would ever forget. How is that possible? Revan asked. He attacked a dozen of the most powerful Sith Lords in their seats of power simultaneously? How many troops does he have? The Imperial Guard were only unleashed on Nyrus and 2 others. The Emperor must have assumed they were the ones least likely to answer his summons. The other 9 were called together in the hours before the attack to meet the Emperor at his citadel. None of them left alive. So what's happening now? Mitra asked. News of the massacre spread quickly, Scourge said. As you would expect, the result was chaos. Thousands are fleeing for their lives, fearing we are on the brink of civil war. Others see an opportunity to strike at rivals, weakened by the sudden loss of political allies, and armed platoons are roaming the streets. How did the Emperor react? Revan asked. He's declared martial law and imposed a curfew over the entire city. The guard are enforcing his orders with their typical ruthless efficiency. He also forbade any ship or shuttle to land or leave before he launched his attack, and he shut down all off-world communications. He's quarantined the entire planet, Revan said. He wants to get everything here back under control before any other worlds hear that he slaughtered the entire Dark Council. You told me he was mad, Mitra muttered, but this is outrageous. There had to be a better way for him to handle this. Thousands of his people are going to die before order is restored. The last time I was here on Droman Kos, I peered into the depths of the Emperor's mind, Revan told him. 1,000 lives mean nothing to him. The last time you were here, Scourge said, pouncing on the phrase. Have some of your memories returned? Seeing my old mask triggered something. I remember everything now, Revan admitted. Malak and I learned the Sith still survived. We came here to Droman Kos to investigate, posing as mercenaries. We spent months learning everything we could about the Emperor and his people. Even back then, he was already planning his invasion of the Republic. When Malak and I learned of his preparations, we tried to stop him. We found a member of the Imperial Guard who was willing to sneak us inside the Citadel. Impossible, Scourge declared. The Guard are bound to the Emperor's will at the end of their training by a powerful ritual. They would never betray him. True, but we didn't know that at the time, Revan explained. We were being led into a trap. The Emperor wanted us to come to him. When we got to his throne room, he was ready and waiting. His voice dropped low. We underestimated his power. When we confronted him, he didn't even have to fight us. Instead, he broke our wills. He dominated our minds, turning us into puppets to do his bidding. He sent us back to the Republic as the vanguard of his invasion, with instructions to report back when all resistance was crushed. But though we had underestimated the Emperor's power, he underestimated us as well. Our wills were stronger than he thought. Our minds twisted and perverted his instructions until we thought we were acting of our own accord. Malak and I were turned to the dark side, but in doing so we found the strength to block out all memory of the Sith and the Emperor, partially freeing us from his control. But you still called yourself Sith, Mitra said, puzzled. You still attacked the Republic and brought it to the verge of collapse before the Jedi captured you. And even after you stopped Malak, the Republic was still as vulnerable as it's ever been. Why didn't the Emperor just invade then? He didn't know what had happened, Revan explained. He was waiting for us to report back. When he heard nothing, he assumed we had failed. He returned to his original plans, slowly and carefully building up his strength so that when he finally did invade, there would be no chance of defeat. Mitra glanced over at Scourge, and the Sith could guess what she was thinking. He'd originally allied with them because he feared invading the Republic would be a disaster. With Revan implying the Emperor could actually succeed, she feared he would turn on them. 2 days earlier, she would have been right. However, everything had changed when Scourge met the Emperor in person. I won't betray you, he assured her. When I spoke with the Emperor, I briefly touched his mind. What he did on Nathema only hints at the horrors he is capable of unleashing on the galaxy. I truly understand what he has become, and I know that unchecked he will lead us to annihilation. It is inevitable. A good speech, Mitra said, but why should we believe you? It's true, Revan assured her. When the Emperor broke my will, he looked into my mind, and I was able to see the reflection of his own evil. Invading the Republic is only the first step of his plan. He's become obsessed with power and immortality. The dark side is like a cancer inside him. It grows faster than he can feed it. He has consumed an entire world, but he still hungers, and with his hunger comes an all-consuming fear. He's lived 1,000 years. He knows he could live many thousands more. He's terrified of death. Everyone is scared of dying, Mitra said. Not like this. For him, death is not merely the end of his physical existence. The Emperor has spent a millennium gathering his strength. If he dies, he will lose everything. The thought of near infinite power slipping through his grasp has driven him mad. In his twisted mind, the only way to preserve what he's accomplished is to annihilate every potential threat in the galaxy. Nathema was just the beginning, Scourge agreed. He will destroy world after world, his power and madness growing in concert until he alone is left, emperor over an empty and lifeless galaxy. Mitra stared at the two in horror. You've been to Nathema, Scourge said. You felt the void. You know what the Emperor is capable of. She understands, Revan said, reading her expression more accurately than Scourge. That's not it. He's quarantined Droman Kaas, Mitra said, trying to lead them to the same conclusion. What if he's preparing to do the same thing here that he did on Nathema? Scourge hadn't considered that possibility, and it chilled him to his core. Is that possible? He asked. Nyrus told me the ritual on Nathema took days, if not weeks, and the Emperor had to trick hundreds of other powerful Sith into working with him so he could draw on their power. He's stronger now, Revan said, but even if it's possible, I don't think he'll go that far. At least not yet. He's too patient, too careful. Droman Kaas is the heart of his empire and the seat of his power. He has too many valuable resources here to throw it all away. But once he is ready, there will be nothing left to stop him from launching his invasion of the Republic. What do you mean? Mitra asked. Scourge answered on Revan's behalf. The Emperor had to keep his plans secret because he knew the Dark Council would oppose him. Now they're wiped out, and whoever he picks to replace them will remember what happened to their predecessors and be too terrified to speak out against him. He can also use this to rally the will of the people, Revan added. He can claim the Dark Council was working with agents of the Republic, and that is why he destroyed them. He will claim the Sith Empire has been rediscovered by its old enemy. He will convince his subjects that the only hope of survival is to strike first. He won't make his proclamation until order is restored on Droman Kaas, Scourge noted. That doesn't give us much time, Mitra remarked, remembering how efficiently the Guard had overrun Nyrus' stronghold. The Guard are patrolling the streets, enforcing the curfew, Scourge said. Only a handful remain stationed at the Citadel. Now is our best chance to strike at the Emperor. This time I know his tricks and tactics, Revan assured them. I can shield my mind from being dominated by his will, and I can show you how to do the same. We should wait until dawn, Scourge said. There will be fewer people out in the light of day, and most of the Guard will be recovering at the barracks after patrolling the streets all night. Good, Revan said. That gives us a few hours to try to get some rest. Both Mitra and Scourge nodded in agreement, though the Sith doubted any of them would get much sleep. And that's the end of Chapter 25. I'm going to jump right into Chapter 26. Scourge hovered on the edge of sleep. His body was exhausted, but his mind was churning. Unable to still his thoughts and let sleep wash over him, he tossed and turned. Unlike his Jedi companions, he had never learned to sit and meditate in order to draw sustenance from the Force. The dark side was about action and activity, not restful contemplation. But he knew that if he didn't try something, he would have to endure a long and restless night. He propped himself into a sitting position and closed his eyes, trying to open himself up to the Force. Taking slow, deep breaths, he focused on letting his mind open itself to the infinite possibilities swirling through time and space. After several minutes, he managed to drift into a state of semi-consciousness. Okay, I think he's having a dream here. Revan lay motionless on the floor of the Citadel's throne room. Mitra and Scourge lay beside him, their bodies twisted and broken, clinging to the last moments of life. The Emperor approached the trio, regarding them with a cold and casual contempt as he loomed above his fallen adversaries. Scourge tried to stand and flee, but his crippled limbs wouldn't support his weight. All he could do was crawl on his belly like a worm. His efforts drew the attention of the Emperor, who didn't speak, but came over and lowered himself to one knee. He grabbed Scourge by the shoulder and rolled him over so he was staring up into the twin voids of the Emperor's eyes. As he reached out a hand and placed it on Scourge's forehead, the Sith began to scream. Scourge's eyes popped open as his mind snapped to a fully alert state of consciousness. His heart was pounding, and he could still hear the sound of his own scream ringing in his ears. Glancing around the cave, he realized the scream must have been confined to his mind. Neither Mitra nor Revan had reacted in any way. She was sitting in the same cross-legged pose Revan had often assumed during his time in Nyrus's prison. Revan was kneeling in front of T3M4, hunched forward, as he rewatched the holovid of his wife and son. Scourge shook his head, trying to push away the remnants of his dream, but the memory stayed with him, and he began to realize that what he had seen was something more than a mere nightmare. The experience lacked the hazy, surreal feel of a dream. It had been too vivid, the details too sharp and precise to be a figment manifested by his subconscious. There was only one possible explanation for what had happened. The Force had given Scourge a vision. Scourge's hands began to tremble slightly as he realized he had witnessed his own destruction at the Emperor's hand. Even worse, the vision made it clear that both Mitra and Revan would suffer the same fate. He had opened himself up to the Force, and it had shown him that their coming mission would end in failure. He glanced over at the Jedi, wondering if he should warn them. Even if he did, would they believe what he said? Could he believe it? His training at the Academy had taught him little about the prophetic abilities of the Force. Was what he had seen inevitable, or was it a fate he could somehow avoid? Maybe his strong connection to the dark side would somehow color his visions, distorting them so they showed the worst of all possible futures. The simplest course would be to tell Revan what he had seen and hear his opinion of it, but Scourge knew his allies' trust in him was already fragile. If he admitted he thought their mission was doomed, it could convince them he couldn't be trusted. They might even decide it was his presence that caused the failure. After all, he was the one who had seen the vision. Scourge continued to struggle with what he'd seen, trying to understand what it meant, and what he should do about it. But after several more minutes of silently talking himself in circles, he realized he simply wouldn't find the answer on his own. He pushed himself to his feet and went over to where Revan was sitting. T3 paused the playback of the holovid as he approached, but left the little image of Revan's wife and son hovering in the air. "May I speak to you?" Scourge asked, taking a seat beside the Jedi without waiting for a reply. "You may," Revan said, not bothering to tear his gaze away from the projection of his family. "I want to know more about the Force," Scourge said. "I want to understand it as you do." Revan turned to give him a quizzical look. "You want to know this now?" "This might be our last chance," Scourge said. "I've been thinking about something you said to me the last time we spoke in your cell." "What is that?" "You knew Mitra was coming to rescue you because the Force had given you a vision." Revan smiled. "Actually, I was bluffing. I was trying to trick you. I was hoping you might dream of me escaping and think the Force was guiding you to help me." "Is that how it happens?" Scourge asked, slightly miffed at Revan's confession. "They come to you in your dreams?" "No. A Force vision is more powerful than any dream. There's an intensity that jumps out at you, and the details do not fade. But I figured you wouldn't know the difference." "I do now," Scourge thought. "I won't apologize for lying to you," Revan said, mistaking the reason for his companion's silence. "And if it makes you feel any better, I actually did have a vision of Mitra after we spoke." "That seems like a highly unlikely coincidence," Scourge noted. "This is the way of the Force," Revan said. Cause and effect are not a simple linear relationship. The force transcends space and time. It flows through us and around us. It influences our past, present, and future. Maybe I spoke to you of visions because I knew the force was trying to reach out to me. Or maybe Mitra came to Droman Kos because I told you someone was coming to rescue me. But she started looking for you long before we had our conversation, Scourge protested. It's complicated, Revan answered with a cryptic smile. Jedi scholars have devoted centuries to understanding the ways of the Force, and we have only scratched the surface. Scourge silently tried to digest what he was being told. At the same time, he tried to form the questions that would give him the answers he wanted without revealing what he had seen. Once you had the vision of Mitra, were you certain she was coming? Did you know for sure that she would help free you? Revan shook his head. We can never be certain about anything. The future is always in motion, and a vision shows you only one of many possible outcomes. Then what purpose do visions serve? They guide us, Revan explained. They give us focus. They show us a goal to strive for or something we can work to prevent. So the visions are not absolute. As I said, the future is always in motion. There was another long period of silence before Scourge asked another question. Have you had any visions of what will happen when we face the Emperor? No, Revan said. The dark side obscures my sight. We are walking into a time and place of shadows, and I cannot promise you that we will ever come out. Doesn't that terrify you? Fear is only an emotion, a trick the mind plays on us. You must learn to set your fear aside. We Sith are taught to embrace our fear, Scourge told him. We transform it into anger and use it to fuel the power of the dark side. But then your actions will always be driven by that fear, Revan said. And what are your actions driven by? Logic? Reason? No, Revan admitted. If I were reasonable, I would never have left my family behind to face the Emperor. Then why did you do it? Revan nodded in the direction of the holoprojection. For them. I want my son to live a long and healthy life. I want him to know peace, not war. I've come to stop the Emperor for him. And what if we don't stop him, Scourge said, treading perilously close to the heart of what he really wanted to say. What if he's too strong? That is a possibility, Revan admitted. But even if we fail to defeat the Emperor, there is still hope. My return will give him pause. He will wonder how I threw off the chains of his will. He will wonder why I have returned and how much the Republic now knows of his plan. He will even wonder about Malak. For all the Emperor knows, Malak is still out there plotting to take the Emperor down if I fail. You're just trying to buy time, Scourge gasped. You don't care if the Emperor kills us all. You just want to delay him. No, Revan said. I want to live. Even more, I want to purge the galaxy of his evil once and for all. But I understand that there can be victory even in defeat. Even if we fall, we will buy time. Maybe a few years, more likely a few decades. Time for your son to become a man, Scourge noted bitterly. Are you hoping he will finish what you might not? Him or someone else, Revan admitted. The Force always strives for balance. The Emperor is an agent of darkness and destruction. It is inevitable that a champion of the light will one day rise to oppose him. I may be that champion. He spoke with no hint of hubris. I've played the role before. At the very least, I will make the Emperor step back and reconsider his plan. If that is my fate, if my role is to sacrifice myself for the one who will come next, then I embrace it. Scourge shook his head. I'm beginning to think you're as mad as the Emperor. I have no intention of dying tomorrow. Neither do I, but if death comes, I will face it without fear. You will find our task easier if you can convince yourself to do the same, he said, before turning his attention back to the holoprojection. Start over from the beginning, Revan told T3, and the astromech obediently restarted the recording. Scourge got to his feet and walked back to the section of the cave he'd been sitting in earlier. He briefly considered talking to Mitra, then realized that that would be a waste of time. She would only echo what Revan had said. The Sith sat down and crossed his legs again, closing his eyes. But he wasn't able to clear his mind this time. Instead, he kept running over Revan's words, playing them against the enduring images of his vision, trying to understand what it all meant. That was a short one. That was the end of chapter 26. So, one more chapter tonight, chapter 27. I have a feeling it's going to leave us on a kind of a cliffhanger. All right. As planned, Revan, Mitra, Scourge, and T3M4 left the cave at dawn, though dawn on Droman Kos was a term with little meaning. The black storm clouds completely blocked out the sun, and the sky was only marginally lighter than it had been during the night. A steady drizzle fell on them as they climbed into the speeder. They rode in silence, all of them preparing in their own way for what they knew lay ahead. Mitra had gone into what Revan called her warrior's trance. She sat still and straight, her eyes focused on nothing as she stared straight ahead. He had seen it many times during the war against the Mandalorians. Before each major battle, she would try to center her emotions, cleansing herself of all fear and hatred, lest the imminent violence draw her toward the dark side. She believed she could transform herself into a perfect conduit for the Force, and in an incorruptible weapon of light. Revan was no longer sure such a thing was possible, but he didn't say anything to Mitra for fear of disrupting her routine. With his memories restored, Revan recalled that he, too, had once clung to a set of rituals before each battle. He would stare at his reflection in the mirror, his face covered by his mask as he recited the Jedi Code over and over, until the words seemed to blend together, their meaning lost in the rhythmic repetition of the mantra. In those days he had believed this would protect him from the dark side, but he no longer had any such illusions. He was older and wiser. He understood that the two sides of the Force were more closely intertwined with each other than either the Jedi or the Sith would ever admit. He had learned to balance on the knife edge between them, drawing on both the light and dark sides for strength. As much as things had changed, however, he still felt the old stirrings of glory as he set off, a faint echo from the impetuousness of youth that had caused him to defy the Council and lead his fellow Jedi into war so many years before. Even T3 was strangely subdued, the gravity of their situation weighing as heavily on the astromech as it did on his organic companions. Revan knew he didn't have to worry about Mitra or the faithful droid. Scourge was another matter, however. The conversation they'd had during the night left little doubt that the Sith was troubled. Unlike the Jedi, he had not spent a lifetime preparing for this. The concept of self-sacrifice came easily to those who walked the path of the light. Even though he occasionally strayed into the dark side, Revan still embraced the nobility of the idea. For the Sith, however, there was no such thing as a noble death. Scourge understood the concept of sacrifice, but only when it came to sacrificing others. He had been taught to value survival above all else. Even his willingness to join Revan and Mitra was driven by his desire for self-preservation. Ultimately, he wanted victory only for his sake, and not for the sake of others. Perhaps there was no greater illustration of the difference between the light side and the dark, and Revan knew it would make their mission more difficult for Scourge. He had tried to make him understand during their brief conversation, but it was hard to undo years of teaching in a single night. Still, the Sith seemed to be holding himself together well enough this morning. "I can't bring the speeder in too close," Scourge said now, taking them in for a landing on the farthest outskirts of Koth City. They might have set up ion cannons to shoot down any unauthorized vehicles. They continued on foot, making their way through the empty streets, heading toward the Citadel. They didn't encounter a single living soul on their journey. Apart from the Emperor's guard, nobody dared to violate the curfew, and 3 force-sensitive individuals and an astromech equipped with top-of-the-line optical and audio sensors had no trouble avoiding the handful of patrols still wandering the streets. As they drew closer to the city's center, the signs of the previous night's mayhem became more frequent and more striking. Most of the windows were shattered, and many of the buildings were blackened by smoke or completely gutted by fire. The street was pockmarked with craters and covered with the burned-out husks of speeders lying on their sides. Most of the dead had been carted away, either by friends or Imperial cleaning crews, but there was still the odd body slumped in a doorway or half hidden under a refuse pile down a side alley. When they finally reached the citadel, there were no entries standing by the entrance at the top of the stairs. "If we run into anyone, let me do the talking," Scourge whispered as they mounted the steps. They were only a few meters away from the entrance when the door flew open, and half a dozen of the red-uniformed soldiers spilled out, armed with blasters and electrostaffs. "You are in violation of the Imperial curfew," one of the soldiers informed him. "Surrender your weapons, and you will be escorted to a nearby prison facility." "You fool!" Lord Scourge spat at the guard, his voice rising with arrogant indignation. "Do you know who I am?" "Only those explicitly authorized by the Emperor are permitted on the streets," the soldier replied, his voice wavering only slightly. "I need no authorization. My name is Lord Scourge, and I demand a meeting with the Emperor." From the reaction of the soldiers, it was clear they recognized the name. No doubt every member of the Emperor's guard was aware of how by now that Scourge had been the catalyst for the Emperor's sudden purge of the entire Dark Council. "We will escort you to him," the leader replied, lowering his weapon, "but the others must wait here." "No," Scourge said. "They will come with me to speak with the Emperor in person." The soldier seemed on the verge of denying the request, and Revan mentally prepared himself to unleash his fury. But at the last minute the man relented, at least partially. "Follow me," he said. "I'll ask the captain to meet us outside the throne room. She will decide whether to allow this." Revan was impressed by Scourge's performance, not to mention relieved. On his last visit to Dromund Kaas, he and Malak had learned everything they could about the Imperial Guard. Though not attuned to the Force in the classical sense, the elite soldiers had a connection with the Emperor, allowing them to draw strength from the dark side. They were formidable opponents, even for a Jedi. He'd feared they'd have to fight through dozens of the Guard before reaching the throne room, giving the Emperor ample time to prepare his counterattack. Now, however, they had a chance to take their adversary by surprise. They were led down a twisting maze of corridors, a long and winding journey that Revan remembered from his last visit to the Citadel. He and Malak had followed the same route, led by a guard they had bribed for access, completely unaware that they were being led into a trap. It was possible the same thing was being done to them this time as well, but Revan didn't think that was the case. The guard who had betrayed him and Malak had met with them numerous times before leading them into the Citadel, no doubt reporting back to the Emperor after each visit. This time, however, events had moved too quickly and too spontaneously for the Emperor's patient hand to be behind them. As they drew closer to the throne room, Revan's thoughts drifted back to his last confrontation with the Emperor. In all his battles, he had never faced an enemy with that kind of power. The dark side had radiated from him in palpable waves, his physical shell barely able to contain the crackling energy. In their last meeting, he had overwhelmed Revan completely. It wasn't even fair to call it a battle. Revan had grown since then. He was far more powerful now, but was he a match for the Emperor? Alone, probably not. With the combined strength of Mitra, Scourge, and even T3, however, he believed they stood a real chance of victory. Despite this, he still felt a chill in his gut when he saw again the enormous Durasteel doors of the throne room. They were shut, of course, but he knew all too well what lay beyond. "Where is your captain?" Scourge demanded, and Revan realized there was nobody there to meet them. "She is coming," the guard assured him. "I will not be kept waiting," Scourge snarled, continuing to play his part. "I demand you open these doors immediately." The soldier hesitated, then motioned for two of his men to do as Scourge had commanded. Revan braced himself for what was to come. They had discussed this part of their plan before leaving the cave. The instant the doors were pushed open, all four would charge inside. While Revan rushed the Emperor, Mitra and Scourge would hang back and hold off the guards long enough for T3 to close and seal the doors. Excuse me. Their timing had to be almost perfect. Revan knew he couldn't go toe-to-toe with the Emperor by himself for very long. He sensed Mitra tensing beside him, and his own hand drifted to the hilt of his lightsaber beneath his belt in anticipation. "What is going on here?" a female voice called out from behind them. The two soldiers who had been about to push open the heavy durasteel doors froze in place. "Captain Yari," said the man who escorted them in, snapping off a sharp salute, "Lord Scourge demands another meeting with the Emperor." Revan was standing with his back to the captain, but he didn't need to see her face to recognize the name. Yari, the guard who had led him and Malak into the Emperor's trap. "This is not acceptable, Lord Scourge," she said, the heels of her boots clacking as she approached. "If you wish to speak with the Emperor, you must do so alone." "I do not take orders from you, Captain," Scourge said. "In the Citadel you do," she answered. "You other two and the droid, step away from there." Revan had been carefully facing away from the speakers during the entire conversation, his eyes fixed on the massive doors. Suddenly, he felt a hand on his shoulder as one of the soldiers tried to pull him clear of the entrance. He slapped the hand away and turned to face them. Yari was standing beside Scourge, a few meters away from the rest of the group. She had come alone to meet them, bringing their escort up to a total of 7. The captain's eyes went wide with shock as she saw his unmistakable red and gray mask. She gasped, then shouted out, "Assassins! Kill them all!" Revan lashed out with his foot, delivering a side kick to the chest of the guard who had grabbed his shoulder, sending the man stumbling back. T3M4, his electrical circuits instantly processing the situation, reacted by firing off his built-in blaster. The beam struck the soldier square in the chest. At the same time, Mitra threw herself at the two guards standing in front of the doors to the throne room, her lightsaber materializing in her hand. Ordinary soldiers would have been chopped down before they could even draw their weapons, but the Imperial Guard were not so easily felled. The first soldier met her charge and parried the first strike with his electrostaff, the resilient metal of this weapon deflecting the energy blade of the Jedi off to the side so that it carved a deep scar in the wall. The second soldier leapt into the fray, forcing Mitra to fall back a step to absorb their coordinated attack. Slightly farther away, Scourge and Captain Yari were also already engaged in close-quarters combat, his lightsaber clashing against her electrostaff as they battled in the narrow confines of the entrance hall. An alarm began to ring out in the hall, triggered by one of the other 3 soldiers. Before they could join in the fight, Revan thrust his hand, palm up, in the direction of the sealed durasteel doors, blasting them wide open with the power of the Force. "Into the throne room!" he shouted, rushing forward. One of the guards battling Mitra broke off and tried to cut Revan off. The Jedi gathered himself and leapt high in the air, tucking his knees in tight to somersault over his opponent. The guard reacted to the unexpected move a fraction too slowly, his electrostaff slicing through the air above his head and missing Revan by only a few centimeters. Revan landed on the ground and wheeled around to face the other man. He thrust out with the force, the impact hitting the soldier square in the chest. Instead of sending him flying, it only staggered him back half a step. This close to the Emperor they were sworn to protect, the guards were able to draw on his power to protect themselves. Still, the slight stumble gave Revan enough time to draw his lightsaber and go on the offensive. He came in with a high overhand chop, an obvious feint meant to draw the defenses of his opponent upward, leaving his legs exposed to a quick follow-up strike. The guard recognized the familiar ploy, countering it by parrying the overhand chop, then quickly dropping his blade low to intercept the inevitable slash at his legs. Only Revan didn't go for his legs. Anticipating that his opponent's defense would go low, he kept his blade up high, allowing him to end the battle with a horizontal cut across the man's suddenly exposed throat. T3 had followed him into the throne room, but Mitra and Scourge were still locked in battle with the guards in the hall outside. They were waging a fighting retreat. They had maneuvered themselves so that they could back into the throne room while keeping the guards at bay. At the far end of the hall, another half a dozen of the Imperial Guard rounded the corner. Revan reached out with the force and ripped the vaulted stone archway in the ceiling above them free from its setting. A shower of dust and debris rained down on the reinforcements, sending them into temporary retreat. It wasn't enough to block the passage, but it did buy Scourge and Mitra a few precious seconds to complete their retreat into the chamber. They crossed the threshold, still engaged with Captain Yari and the 3 surviving Imperial Guard that had escorted them to the throne room. Revan reached out with the force and slammed the Durasteel doors shut, the clang echoing loudly in the throne room. "Seal the doors," he shouted at T3. Then he turned his attention to the other end of the throne room. The Emperor was seated on his throne, watching the proceedings with cold detachment. Revan felt the same chill he'd experienced the last time he'd come into the Emperor's presence, the physical manifestation of his enemy's malevolent power. "I did not expect you to return," the Emperor said, rising to his feet. Revan didn't bother to reply as he charged forward. Scourge was an expert swordsman. At the academy, even the instructors had been reluctant to face him in the training ring. When the dark side flowed through him, his blade was more than a weapon. It became an extension of his will. Captain Yari's skill with her electrostaff was impressive, but ultimately she was no match for a Sith Lord. Knowing this, she had wisely adopted a defensive style to hold off the first few flurries of Scourge's attack. Her focus on stalling him long enough for one of her companions to join the fray before switching to a more aggressive form. Now Scourge was forced to defend himself in 2 fronts as he backed into the throne room. In his peripheral vision, he saw that Mitra was in a similar situation, retreating while battling a pair of enemies. The fact that Revan hadn't come to their aid told Scourge that the Jedi had gone to confront the Emperor, conjuring up images from Scourge's vision of him lying broken and beaten on the floor at the Emperor's feet. Yari's staff slipped through his defenses and clipped him on the right shoulder. Scourge's armor absorbed the worst of the blow, though he felt a painful jolt from the electrostaff's charge that made his hand and arm tingle. Even as Scourge cursed himself for allowing thoughts of his vision to distract him, he deftly switched his blade from his temporarily numb right hand to his left. The move was dangerous. It left him momentarily vulnerable as he made the switch. Fortunately, his opponents were unprepared for the unorthodox tactic, and neither was able to take advantage. While he and Mitra fought the quartet of guards, T3M4 was busy sealing the doors. The droid was spraying black foam along the edge where the double doors came together. Scourge recognized the foam as a powerful contact adhesive commonly used to repair starships. Seconds after being exposed to air, it would harden into a substance that could be cut only with a plasma torch. Yari's blade nearly caught him again, narrowly missing his cheek, and Scourge swore out loud. If he didn't stay focused on the fight, his vision of the Emperor killing him wouldn't even have a chance to come true. "Go help Revan," Mitra shouted to T3 as the astromech finished his task. Scourge pressed his attack, calling on the dark side to transform his uncertainty and fear into white-hot rage. He felt the power coursing through him, the spark of fury deep inside him igniting into a firestorm of death and destruction. Left-handed, Scourge unleashed a pair of savage chops at Yari's partner, using raw brute strength to overpower his physically weaker opponent. The guard parried the blows, but the first knocked him off balance, and the second sent him stumbling backward. While the guard struggled to recover, Scourge focused his assault on the captain. Yari sensed the shift in her opponent too late to switch back to a more defensive form, and the Sith Lord was quick to exploit the tactical flaw. A 4-move sequence overwhelmed Yari, causing her to leave her right flank unprotected. Scourge seized the opportunity, his blade biting deep into her hip. Yari screamed, dropped her blade, and fell to the ground. The other guard leapt to her defense, recklessly throwing himself between his fallen captain and Scourge. The only reward for his effort was a quick death, delivered by a diagonal lightsaber slash across his chest. At Scourge's feet, Yari fumbled to reclaim her weapon. The agony of her wound made her desperate and clumsy, giving Scourge time to relish her suffering. As her fingers wrapped around the hilt of her electrostaff, he brought his boot down on top of her hand, crushing the bones. He stared into the captain's eyes one last time, savoring her terror before decapitating her with a single stroke. "We have to help Mitra! We have to help Revan!" Mitra shouted, and Scourge turned to see that she, too, had just finished off her opponents. "He needs us!" And that is the end of that chapter. I knew it was going to leave us on a cliffhanger. So, that'll be that for this time. We've got 2 more chapters in the epilogue to finish out the book. We'll do that on Wednesday, barring some thing getting in the way. So, we will call it there. Yeah, I think I'm going to go ahead and play some Greedfall. So I'll end this session and come back in a few minutes to start that. See you in a bit.
My heart is beating. I know the pieces. One is broken, one is beat. Because I have seen the apart. I have known so about the blade. I didn't anything to say. Follow your heart. Don't take. If you leave it behind. Someone will bring. I left you my heart. What did you do? You used to you left me all shy. Was my love? Was it dark? You have no answers. Don't know without you. How will I